So in the last video, I covered the first 5 books in the Wings of Fire series. Now in part 2, I'm covering the next 5, being books 6 through 10, otherwise known as Arc 2. If you're unfamiliar with the series and franchise, you may want to check out the intro of part 1 for a brief introduction. Anywho, moving forward into... Six months after the end of the war, the Dragonettes of Destiny decided to build and form the very first multi-dragon tribe school, Jade Mountain Academy. The school is located within Jade Mountain, hence the name, and currently has 5 students per tribe enrolled within the school. Each dragon is sorted into a winglet that contains 1 member of each tribe, being Jade, Silver, Copper, Gold, and Quartz. Our main characters in this arc are primarily situated in the Jade Winglet, with Moonwatcher, Kinkajou, Winter, Turtle, and Qibli. However, this arc also heavily involves Peril, a Skywing with fire scales who was introduced back in Book 1, who was used as ex-Queen Scarlet's gladiator in her arena to kill primarily prisoners of war, and an enemy, one of Queen Coral's 3 daughters and the sibling of Tsunami and Turtle, who is also quite prominent in the last 2 books of this arc. Also, remember earlier when I told you that Nightwings had powers, but it turns out that that was a lie and they're completely powerless? Well, guess what? That was also a lie, and Nightwings can actually have powers if their egg is hatched under the light of a full moon. Being hatched under 1 full moon gives the Dragonette either foresight or mind reading, being hatched under 2 gives both, and being hatched under 3 strengthens both previous powers. This is revealed through the first point of view protagonist of this arc, Moonwatcher, who was born under 2 full moons. Another major player in this arc is Darkstalker, who is a 2,000-year-old animus dragon who enchanted himself to be immortal and invulnerable. He is half Nightwing and half Icewing and was born under 3 full moons, meaning he has strong mind reading and prophetic abilities. He is currently stuck under a mountain nearby Jade Mountain Academy and can only communicate with Moonwatcher due to their shared mind-reading abilities. He also high-key murdered his dad and may have caused his entire tribe to abandon their previous kingdom in fear of him. Anyway, back to school. As it turns out, holding a multi-dragon tribe school a mere 6 months after a several-decade war, when your students include child soldiers who maybe probably fought each other in that war, is maybe not the best idea. And it's not long before dragons start dying, including a member of the Jade Winglet. This event triggers Moonwatcher to have an actual real prophecy this time, foretelling the potential destruction of Jade Mountain. This, combined with the group's willingness to help Winter search for his missing brother Hailstorm, leads them to set out on a grand journey to find both Winter's brother and hopefully save Jade Mountain along the way. I'd say Arc 2 is decent for the most part. Characterization was definitely stronger in this arc, excluding the last book for basically every single character, except maybe Qibli, but Book 10 just sucks, but we'll get to that. Peril and Turtle's friendship, starting in Book 8, was a surprisingly nice addition, which I did genuinely enjoy reading about. Winter and Qibli's dynamic was definitely the most entertaining aspect of this arc, at least in my opinion, and overall I'd probably rate it a 6 out of 10. A little above average, but not great. Although, again, its ending with Book 10, which fucking sucks, absolutely dragged down the whole arc with it. Spoilers for the entirety of Books 6 through 10 from this point on. To start, the editing gets worse. There is at least 1 sentence that starts with a lowercase in each book in Arc 2, alongside outright wrong words being used in sentences, making them hard to read. There's also some more prominent consistency errors. For example, with the Dream Visitors, in Book 6 it states that Darkstalker made 3 Dream Visitors, 1 for him, 1 for Clearsight, and 1 for Fathom. But in several books in Arc 1 it states that a Sandwing Animus made the Dream Visitors. So then who the fuck actually made them? Moving on from that, what was the point of Ruby being Tourmaline? In Book 8's prologue, we're given context as to Ruby, who is Queen Scarlet's daughter, talking with her sister Tourmaline, who intends to challenge Queen Scarlet for the throne before ultimately disappearing. Ruby assumes Peril killed Tourmaline for Scarlet. However, at the end of Book 8, when Ruby and Scarlet fight for the throne, it is revealed that Ruby was Tourmaline after an enchanted earring is removed. My problem with this is it literally changed nothing about the story. Ruby turns into Tourmaline, kills Scarlet, and then immediately turns back into Ruby because her son, Cliff, doesn't recognize her as Tourmaline. There was no impact on the character at all, really. Other than a look into how animus spells on personality work, I don't really see what the point of having Ruby be Tourmaline was, other than to act as a plot twist near the end of the story. The next minor aggravation is that Thorn and Smolder have implied romantic feelings for each other in Book 10. I think this is fucking weird for a couple of reasons. First, Smolder has kidnapped both her and her daughter in the past, knowing that trapping them meant they'd get killed by burn. Second, Smolder is not only twice Thorn's age, being about 40 years old compared to Thorn's 20, but his daughter Onyx is the same age as Thorn. His daughter is the same age as his love interest. What the fuck? Not Smolder being that creepy dad who hits on his daughter's friends. Gross. Moving on to the final major annoyance. This arc could have ended at the start of Book 9 if anyone had any brain cells. At the end of Book 8, Darkstalker is freed from his mountain and turns out, completely unsurprisingly, to be a massive villain, who aims first to become King of the Nightwings and later the entirety of Pyrrha. And he has absolutely no qualms enchanting and manipulating everyone around him to get his way, which he does. Turtle, who is rightly horrified by Darkstalker, immediately enchants a stick to make himself completely invisible to Darkstalker both in awareness, memory, and foresight, erasing himself completely from Darkstalker's mind. Because of how unrestricted Animus magic seems to be, from here, Darkstalker could have been outright beaten or rendered significantly weaker almost immediately if Turtle had 1. Enchanted everyone to be completely invisible to Darkstalker, basically the spell Turtle made on his stick, but for everyone. And this didn't even need a new spell to be achieved. If they could have worked fast enough to avoid Darkstalker stopping them once Turtle let go of the stick, they could have just replicated his stick in the enchanted bowl, which doubles everything put inside of it upon the correct command until everyone had one. 2. Enchant something that can pierce even invulnerable scales. 3. Enchant something to remove all of Darkstalker's powers, including his mind reading and prophecy powers, and add a clause that states they are impossible to get back even with Animus magic. I.e., stick, I enchant you to hunt down Darkstalker and remove his Animus, prophecy, and mind reading powers as soon as you touch him. This enchantment cannot be undone by any means, including Animus magic. 4. Enchant an object that will undo all of Darkstalker's Animus spells, past, present, and future, and then watch him turn to dust because he's old as shit and not immortal anymore. And this is just stuff off the top of my head. I'm just saying, beating Darkstalker could have been easy if Turtle had any brain cells or if Qibli was actually as smart as these books keep telling me he is. Now moving on to the more substantial issues with this arc. You might remember me mentioning earlier how there was one book I felt so betrayed by that I dropped the series altogether. Well, it was this book. This big-ass motherfucker crushed all of my hopes and dreams, stole my wife and kids, murdered me, and then proceeded to do an Irish jig on my grave. To start, almost every character is written poorly in this book, Winter in particular, but he was butchered so bad he's getting his own section. Moon also comes across as a massive idiot in the last 2 books. Darkstalker is pretty obviously evil and has been since book 6, and the fact that she continued believing Darkstalker was both good and her friend until almost the end of book 10, even when he very obviously enchanted Winter literally as soon as he escaped from the mountain over an entire book earlier, is just stupid. Moon was naive and sheltered growing up, but she wasn't an idiot in previous books. Further, it could have been more satisfying to watch her figure out on her own that she's been misled by Darkstalker by recognizing how much he's been manipulating her instead of having to be told by other characters. But the series is full of missed opportunities, so I really should not be surprised. Moving on from that, the pacing is also off, with the first 2/3 of the book feeling quite slow and the last 100 pages suddenly moving at the speed of lightning. Further, the first 260 pages, which is the slowest section of the book, isn't even to do with the primary plot, being trying to stop Darkstalker, and is instead focused on Qibli's evil grandfather, Vulture, and his crime group because they want to overthrow Thorn. I did the math, and literally 70% of this book is just side plot. And I want to say these first 260 pages were completely unnecessary and poor narrative structure. But Qibli and Winter's dynamic in them is literally the only enjoyable part of the book. The last 100 pages, which is actually about the main storyline, is so rushed that everything happened in it kind of didn't make any sense. Since we kept zooming from one plot point to another, we never had time to stop and absorb what was actually happening. It really felt like the author was rushed to make this book, or at least that's what I'm going to assume, as other Wings of Fire books don't seem to have this pacing issue. Moving on to Vulture, who is basically the main villain of this book, considering we get more time reading about him and stopping him than we do with Darkstalker, was objectively poorly written. He's built up as menacing and dangerous for the first 2/3 of the book, with our characters sleuthing as to how they'll manage to beat him, constructing him as an imposing and capable villain, even being described as a large, terrifying presence that loomed over every corner of Qibli's early life. And then he just completely disappears afterwards. I'm not even joking. He's a scary big bad guy and then basically ceases to exist as a threat in the narrative. It's really jarring and confusing to read. He also never comes back as an actual threat comparable to how he was built up to be after the end of the book. He is literally never brought up again. He's a completely wasted character, and he's also pretty poorly characterized as well. He just comes across as a mustache-twirling villain who's evil and bad because the author wanted an evil and bad character, instead of a believably bad and evil individual. Overall, complete wasted potential. The empathy spell, if you will, created to stop the war between the Icewings and Nightwings when they're fighting over Jade Mountain, which was incited by Darkstalker inflicting a magical plague on the entirety of the Icewing tribe, which ends up killing their queen. The spell itself was an animus spell created by Qibli and enacted by an enemy. It forced every Icewing and Nightwing to feel each other's feelings as if they're their own for a time span of 100 heartbeats, after which they'd all be transported back to their respective kingdoms. This successfully ends the battle and the war, alongside saving Jade Mountain from being destroyed in the process. However, in universe, it also magically ends the several thousand-year grudge each tribe held against each other, which feels incredibly unbelievable. That short time span of forced empathy won't end prejudice that deeply ingrained in their societies that quickly. Could it potentially initiate a slow change in their societies? Totally, I'd buy that, but in Arc 3, through Snowfall's book, we see basically all the Icewings are suddenly chill, pun not intended, with Nightwings. Like all of them. And considering how much hatred of Nightwings was ingrained in their society before, as we see through Winter's point of view, I just don't believe it would change that much that quickly. And finally, moving on to my final major issue with this book, the ending. The ending felt incredibly hypocritical, as the entire arc was centered around how changing someone with animus magic against their will is wrong. This is shown through Hailstorm, who was transformed into Pyrite, and how badly it affected him after he was turned back into himself. Through Ruby, who is actually Tourmaline, how changing Kinkaju's feelings with magic against her consent was wrong. But then what do they do to Darkstalker? They change him with animus magic against his will, of course. So near the end of Book 10, Darkstalker reunites with his mother, Foeslayer, for the first time since he escaped the mountain, in which Moon asks him if he'd be willing to accept a new shot at life as a dragonette, in which he'd lose all of his powers and memories. He refuses and instead is fed a strawberry by Quincas. After eating it, he is transformed into the dragonette described before, now called Peacemaker, who is now half Rainwing instead of half Icewing. Quincas may have also changed Peacemaker's personality as well. This plan worked because, as it turns out, the strawberry was enchanted by a piece of Darkstalker's own magical scroll, therefore bypassing his immunity to animus spells cast by other animus dragons. So not only did they go against the entire message of the previous 4 books, but none of the main characters even question it from a moral standpoint. His mother, Moon, and Quincas just decide for him, and do it even when he actively refuses the offer. "No," he said. I can't do it, I won't. I don't want to lose all of my memories. I'd forget Clearsight. She'd be even more gone than she is now." Foeslayer literally says, "I decided we'd both be happier this way." Also, the fact that his Icewing heritage was erased in favor of making him half Rainwing instead felt pretty f***ed up, and yet it's treated like a fun twist for some reason. "Oh yeah, I made him half Rainwing," Quincas said, fighting back a giggle. "I thought that would be good for him, and it turned out so pretty." The fact that Quincas is described as fighting back a giggle after completely erasing his history and familial background and forcing it into something else without his consent just feels so disturbing. Like, genuinely, how is this not absolutely fucking horrifying? Couldn't they have just killed the guy? Because it genuinely would have been a more merciful and better end to his character. The love triangle between Moonwatcher, Qibli, and Winter is a major component to the second arc and is, or at least definitely was, also a major point of contention within the fandom as well. And it's trash. At least in my opinion. Since the love triangle's entire basis relies on Winter and Qibli both liking Moon and which one she'll choose in the end. The conflict relies on becoming invested in one pairing over the other. This doesn't really work because neither Moon and Qibli, or referred to by the fandom as Moonblee, or Moon and Winter, referred to as Winter Watcher, are executed well. We as readers aren't even given convincing reasons as to why either Qibli or Winter like Moon romantically in the first place. They just meet her and magically start crushing on her like 2 days later. The closest we came to this was Winter finding out Moon was also interested in scavengers like he was, but that still doesn't feel like a convincing enough reason to insert a several books length long romantic subplot. And on Qibli's end, we did not get shit. He just likes her because the author told us he did. I genuinely have no idea what Qibli likes about Moon, or why he fell in love with her in the first place. Genuinely zero clue. The lack of a convincing foundation for romantic feelings is bad for any romantic pairing, but it's especially bad when this particular love triangle involves 60% of the point of view characters for this arc, and then doesn't get resolved until literally the very end of book 10. The love triangle is genuinely not resolved until the epilogue of the very last book. I'm gonna cry. So, bad start already, but don't worry, it doesn't get much better. For the canonical resolution to the love triangle, I really do think overall it was probably the worst option out of the 3 potential pairings. I'm gonna get flamed for this. As mentioned above, the execution was really not done well. As mentioned, Qibli starts liking Moon for no conceivable reason, and moving on from that, there was no romantic build-up between Moon and Qibli throughout the series. Moon shows basically no romantic interest in Qibli except for like one scene in the last book. I'm not joking here. There was no build-up, and I can prove this because as I was reading through the arc, I took note of every single romantically coded scene for each of the potential ships that could constitute romantic build-up and tension between the characters, and there was, and I'm not even kidding here, one scene for this ship. One. Across 5 books with a pairing that starts in book 6 and ends in book 10. One scene. And this is the canon pairing. You literally cannot make this shit up. Compare that to an also meager 3 for Winter Watcher, although still over double the amount from Moonblee. Here's a handy graph I constructed to show you. I've counted both in total number of scenes and in total numbers of pages to account for the fact that some scenes may be longer and more impactful than others. Pretty insane for a relationship that's supposed to have been built up over 5 books. Moving on from the lack of sufficient build-up, the pairing doesn't really feel particularly engaging or interesting and doesn't feel like it was necessary or beneficial to the story. It's not new in terms of tribe relations, as a pairing between a Nightwing and Sandwing has already been explored the arc before with Stonemover and Thorn. And Nightwings and Sandwings don't really have any particular biases against each other, so it's not compelling from that angle. Their dynamic wasn't new or particularly interesting either. Neither characters feel better in scenes they're together in compared to scenes where they're not. They just don't seem to notably improve each other as individuals in any way beyond that of regular friends. It just feels like an unnecessary and bland pairing. They come across as good friends, but not as romantic partners. Additionally, the way the love triangle was resolved felt lazy and forced. And I quote, "I didn't want to choose, but if I want either of them in my life, I know I have to." The fact that the entire reason Moon entered into a relationship with Qibli was because she felt like she had to? Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. If this was the only way the author felt like they could write this pairing, it should not have been written at all. And the final cherry on top for me is that even in Arc 3, where they're meant to be a couple, they act exactly the same as before in the previous arc. They act like good friends except for like one scene in the very last book of Arc 3. They have no romantic chemistry at all and just feel like a lazy pairing by the author. This pairing is also really all tell and no show. The series tells me they love each other a lot, but it doesn't show me that it's true. Although I will give some credit here in mentioning that this relationship isn't unhealthy. The bar may be in hell, but that already makes it better than a good chunk of the relationships in this series, so I'll give it that. Moving on to Winter Watcher. Whilst this pairing had the potential to be more interesting than Moonblee, it's still really not good. The ship's strongest pull is in the narrative and symbolic weight involved in a successful Nightwing and Icewing pairing, as the two tribes have hated each other for 2,000 years at this point in the story. Additionally, due to this potential relationship being introduced as the same arc as Darkstalker and his background, alongside featuring an actual war between the two tribes, the prospect of a romance between the two characters has the potential to be quite engaging and narratively impactful. Especially considering how the hatred between Icewings and Nightwings, and further the failure of his parents' marriage, helped shape Darkstalker into the villain of the arc that he became. As a result, the potential of the second arc focusing on building and establishing a healthy and positive relationship between a Nightwing and Icewing through Moonwatcher and Winter could have been an interesting contrast to Darkstalker and his beliefs. However, even taking this into account, Winter Watcher is not a good pairing either. Winter and Moon don't really seem to fit together in terms of their personality, and Winter is also often a massive douchebag to Moon, making the potential pairing solidly questionable in terms of being a healthy and fair relationship. Whilst Moon does help Winter expand his worldviews and question the way he was raised, so do all of his friends. And much like with Qibli, Winter's presence doesn't seem to improve Moon as an individual in any particular way. I think the major crux as to why the love triangle is such a headache to read is that Moon isn't a good match for either of her love interests. So their interest in her comes off as contrite and forced. Especially with how much Winter and Qibli think about Moon in their respective books. It's absolutely aneurysm-inducing to read. In the whole love triangle, there was only one option that I think actually could have been good. And it wouldn't even require any major writing or narrative changes throughout the arc to feel believable and well built up. Remember that graph I brought up earlier to convey the utter lack of build-up for both major ships? Well, if I count all the scenes between Winter and Qibli that could be romantically coded or be argued as romantic tension with minor writing changes, and then add that to the graph, it absolutely topples the other two, with double the number of scenes the other ships had combined. Further, Quinta has a much more interesting dynamic compared to Moonblee or Winter Watcher. Their interactions are engaging and interesting, and generally a lot of fun to read. Their contrasting personalities and worldviews also mean they challenge each other in a meaningful way. Qibli really helps Winter open up and to start trusting and accepting help from his friends, alongside challenging him when he's being a douche canoe. Further, Winter is the only one of Qibli's friends to identify Qibli's persona that he uses to both get people to like him, but also to some degree manipulate those around him, and is the only one to suggest that this isn't a 100% positive thing either. This is important, as this aspect of Qibli's personality comes from his intense desire for everyone to like him, stemming from abuse in his childhood, which I'll be going into in greater detail in a later section. The key part is this desire is so pervasive to where it is both harmful to himself and a reflection of his deep lack of self-esteem. Further, Winter and Qibli also share similar backgrounds, with both having suffered abuse from their families, both being treated as unwanted, useless, and failures, but reacted in contrasting ways. This makes them an intriguing duo in how they can both deeply relate to each other, yet similarly learn a lot from each other, as each has differing strengths and weaknesses. And they've both helped each other with their respective issues. For instance, Qibli helped Winter search for his brother and stopped him from giving up when he thought Hailstorm was dead. And Winter helped Qibli feel better about having to face his grandfather in Book 10, something Qibli even acknowledges hasn't happened before. Additionally, Winter and Qibli also spend significantly more time together, making a potential romance not only more believable but also more satisfying to read. Overall, Quinta felt like a stronger potential pairing than the other two, with engaging scenes, an interesting and entertaining dynamic, the potential for realistic build-up, and the potential for a very satisfying and strong relationship if the necessary effort and thought was put into it to make it both believable and healthy for both characters. As a result, it'd definitely get my vote for being the best of the three love triangle ships. Granted, I still don't think the love triangle was necessary at all, as all three characters' arcs could have been perfectly, if not more, satisfactory without any love interest at all. But I still maintain Quinta was notably the best option of the three. This might be an unpopular opinion, considering I haven't ever heard of anyone else sharing it, but I don't think the depiction of the abuse Qibli faced was executed well. The depiction of abuse felt over the top and overly simplistic. Sirocco and Rattlesnake, Qibli's siblings, start off as cartoonish bullies who torment Qibli for fun and in the present just become dumb lackeys for their grandfather, Vulture, and like to kill dragons. That's it. There is genuinely no further nuance into their characters. They're just bad for the sake of it. And moving on to Cobra, Qibli's mother, her character is, much like Qibli's siblings, not really explored at all. She's given no background or motivation to the reader as to why she's such an abusive parent, she just is. So much like Qibli's siblings, her character just feels abusive and bad for the sake of being abusive and bad. Like if you asked a 12-year-old to write an abusive family, this feels like the kind of thing they would write. Qibli's entire family is written so one-dimensionally that it feels like they were created purely to give Qibli a tragic backstory and not to make any meaningful commentary or exploration into the topic of abuse. This makes scenes where Qibli gets attacked by his mother feel gratuitous and over the top. Contrast this with how Winter's family was portrayed. First, their family dynamic was better introduced through Winter and Icicle in Book 6 instead of relying purely on small flashbacks like in Book 10, or hints through Moon's mind reading like in Book 6. Winter's parents, Narwhal and Tundra, are also explored a lot more as characters throughout the arc, which allows the reader to understand why these characters are like this, which means we as readers are both able to meaningfully analyze why individuals turn out like this, but are also able to analyze through the lens of Icewing society how a culture itself can both uphold and encourage abusive parenting. This is good for a number of reasons. First, it justifies the existence of the abusive characters in the story as they have a purpose other than to act as a tragic backstory. Second, since their characters and society were actually explored, it can also serve as a cautionary tale and an analysis into how hyper-competitive and rigid societies that value achievement above all else encourage harsh and abusive parenting. Now, in terms of how Qibli as a character himself is written, I thought it was actually pretty decent. His reaction towards his abuse felt like a real struggle someone might go through. Through his perspective, we can see he internalized quite a lot of the abuse he received, believing that if he had been more likable, or smarter, or stronger, maybe he would have received the love from his mother he wished for instead of her abuse. This deep-rooted desire for his mother's love continues into Book 10. Will Mother notice if I'm really clever, and then will she realize I'm more interesting than she ever thought I was? This internalization also causes a deep insecurity within Qibli, in which he tries to fill through the validation of others around him. Believing if he can get everyone to like him and acknowledge his talents, he will prove himself as worthwhile, instead of the useless, spotted waste of scales his family told him he was. Further, the quote, "dragons who seem to actually like him, he could never resist them," demonstrates his intense desire for validation. The use of the phrase "could never resist" helps reframe this desire as unhealthy and addictive, effectively conveying that this habit is harmful to himself. This also manifests in a desire to be special and powerful, leading to his wish to be an animus dragon. This is explored decently well throughout Book 10, being one of the only good aspects of that awful book. This warped view of self-worth is also seen through Qibli's thought pattern. She's like turtle in peril. She thinks I don't deserve magic. In Qibli's mind, he didn't receive magic not because magic is powerful and dangerous, but because he thinks they think he is undeserving of it. Qibli doesn't view Turtle not giving him animus magic out of caution, and as we later find out, because he already made someone an animus, which did not exactly go well, but because Qibli isn't good enough. Qibli misinterprets reasonable caution as a rejection of him as an individual. This thought process was both created by and reinforced by the abuse he suffered. He still heard them all the time, their voices in his head telling him how wretched he was. Overall, I think Qibli's internal struggle with his past was done quite well, and his slow resolution to finding self-worth in his own terms away from power, demonstrated by him rejecting Darkstalker's offer to make him an animus, was a nice touch. I'll give kudos to the author here. However, I think his character growth could have also benefited more from putting more emphasis on how his desire for everyone to like him is unhealthy. The roots are there, I think it just needs to be conveyed a little better. Alongside better demonstrating Qibli growing his self-worth on his own terms and coming to realize he is a valid and lovely individual all on his own, and learning to appreciate himself void from others would have been really nice to see, as this is never really seen in the book. Now, I mentioned earlier that I felt betrayed by Book 10, and this character is why. Winter had the potential to, at least in my opinion, be the best and most complex character in this entire series. Granted, this is Wings of Fire, so that's not a huge bar, but you get my point. The reason for this is Winter is an excellent exploration into the effects of harmful parenting and a damaging society. And what makes Winter so interesting is his character actually displays the negative effects of this. He is emotionally dysregulated. He mimics the unhealthy and even harmful behavior learned from his family and society. He is confused and all over the place, and he is allowed to exist as an abused character instead of as a villain. He is given the chance to learn better and to heal from what's happened to him. A significant step up from characters like the alternates in the previous arc. although there is some necessary context to understand Winter's character involving a brief look into Icewing society, specifically the Gift of Order. The Gift of Order is an animus enchanted wall with all the names of Icewing aristocracy on it, used to maintain and oversee each dragon rank within the circles. There are 7 circles in total, with the first circle being the highest ranked and 7th being the lowest. Since Winter was unlucky enough to be Queen Glacier's nephew, he is included in this ranking system. Icewing society is also hierarchical? I can't speak anyway, as only the first 3 circles can live in the palace and are treated with more respect than those in lower circles. Unfortunately for Winter, he can't seem to rise very high in the circles, an issue made even more glaringly obvious when his older brother Hailstorm and same-age sister Icicle seem to remain in first circle with ease. As a result, he is neglected, insulted, and treated poorly by his parents, Tundra and Narwhal. Leading to our first scene analysis, being the polar bear scene at the very start of Book 7. When Winter was 2 years old, he, alongside his siblings and 2 of his cousins, were sent out on a hunt for a polar bear. The first to bring one down would get the high honor of being seated next to Queen Glacier at her table that evening, alongside contributing to their circle ranking. Winter, who is currently stuck in 3rd circle and ruthlessly compared to his more successful siblings, is desperate to succeed. He does end up finding a polar bear, however hesitated to kill it after finding out it had cubs, resulting in him losing the bear and the hunt as a whole, alongside gaining punishment from his parents and society, as he was sent all the way down to 5th circle, which is just sad. A genuine act of empathy towards other creatures being treated like it's a bad thing. However, this scene effectively establishes that a society that values achievement above all else actively shapes individuals to be cold, calculating, merciless, and to value their own goals above the well-being of both themselves and everyone else around them. In a previous rankings test with his 2 siblings, they'd lost him as soon as they could, each striking out on their own. It made sense even to a 1-year-old dragonette struggling through a blizzard. Nobody wanted to risk letting someone else drag down their ranking. This ruthless construction of Icewing society is further reinforced by Winter describing these hunts as a test, a chance to prove your worth and climb higher in the rankings. Again, ascribing an Icewing's worth, even as dragonettes, to their performance within a narrow mold that their society forces everyone into. However, Winter's abuse from his parents only worsens after Hailstorm goes missing, in which they unfairly blame Winter, as Hailstorm had taken Winter into Skywing territory when Winter was 3 to search for scavengers, which is a special interest of Winter's. In the process, they get caught by Skywing soldiers and Hailstorm offers himself prisoner in exchange for letting Winter escape. Winter was then branded a deserter and was struck down to 6th circle. I think objectively we can say that it wasn't Winter's fault, since the trip was both Hailstorm's idea, and Winter even stated beforehand that going into Skywing territory was risky. But he was still blamed by everyone else and himself for what happened. I couldn't re-find the quote, but Winter's parents literally refused to speak to him for a month after they thought Hailstorm had been killed after being taken prisoner. We can further see the harmful effects of Tundra and Narwhal's parenting and Winter's interactions with others when he joins Jade Mountain Academy. When Winter is suspicious of Moonwatcher, withholding secrets surrounding Nightwing powers in Book 6, he thinks to himself, "If I'm scary enough, she'll do what I want," his mind whispered. That's what Mother would say. As we can see, negative tier parenting here. Even the mantra his parents taught him is concerning. Be strong, be vigilant, strike first, trust nobody. It's no wonder the kid turned out maladjusted and unable to form proper connections with other dragons. He was never shown what a healthy bond looked like in the first place and was actively shaped to avoid it. As a result, Winter struggles significantly with forming and maintaining healthy bonds with other dragons. That look they got whenever he did something wrong. The look that said, "If only we'd lost you instead of Hailstorm. If only you met any of our expectations. If only you were everything an Icewing should be." I think this quote is great for a couple of reasons. First, not only does it convey Narwhal and Tundra's high expectations for Winter and also their god-awful parenting, it also communicates the motivation behind their actions. If only you were everything an Icewing should be. Whilst Tundra and Narwhal are abusive and harmful parents, the true root of the issue is Icewing society itself. In a ruthlessly competitive society that values achievement under a very narrow definition above all else, not only is abusive parenting allowed to exist, it is encouraged. Winter even states when talking about his parents to Qibli that that's how Icewing parents are supposed to be. Winter's inability to conform to Icewing standards doesn't make his parents question their views or Icewing society at large, it just makes him an expendable failure. Winter enrolling in Jade Mountain Academy and meeting the other members of his winglet marks the start of him growing beyond his family and tribe. What in the world made these dragons think his problem was their problem? It made no sense for any not Icewing to get involved at all. The fact that his winglet members, aka friends, but I'm pretty sure that concept is pretty new to him, were willing to help him even though it wouldn't benefit them, contrasts so greatly with his previous experience with his family, he genuinely cannot understand why they're helping him at all. However, this helps challenge the harmful and damaging values of Icewing society that he grew up with, and helps question Winter's internal belief that he's useless and not worth helping in the first place. Additionally, Winter's experience with his friends continues to change his worldview. Winter acknowledges that he feels comforted by his friends helping and wonders if this is how Mudwings feel, due to the Mudwing sibling bond. His parents argued during the war that the strong bond and kinship between Mudling siblings made Mudwings weak. Yet Winter starts to question this when reflecting how the Mudwings weren't easy opponents. A pivotal point in this scene is when Winter thinks, maybe I'd rather have allies like Qibli and Moon making their own decisions and trusting each other than a commander telling me what to do. As it reveals Winter's changing ideals and values, shifting from desperately wanting to align with Icewing standards and the admiration and respect of his family that comes with it, to slowly learning that his friends, not his family, and the Icewings are better for him. This is reinforced when Winter, with the help of his friends, does end up finding Hailstorm and returns to the Ice Kingdom with him. It's not what I want. His chest felt as if it might burst, spilling shattered ice everywhere. It's how things have to be. This is another of many examples of how Icewing society and traditions have harmed Winter and likely many other Icewings as well, forcing Icewings to abandon what truly makes them happy and instead to conform to Icewing tradition. The final cementation of his growth away from the Ice Kingdom was in his family's final betrayal. That was their plan, to move a dragon into first place who would be no trouble for Hailstorm to defeat. Snowfall was Glacier's daughter and formidable in her own way, only a few months from her hatching day. But Winter was expendable. To explain, basically when Winter returns to the Ice Kingdom, his parents in Queen Glacier's absence adjust both Winter and Hailstorm's circle rankings upon their return, placing Hailstorm in 7th circle, the lowest, and Winter in 1st circle, the highest. Upon a Dragonet's 7th hatching day, their rank more or less becomes permanent. However, for dragons in 7th circle, there is one final option to move up among the ranks, the Diamond Trial, in which the lowest ranked and highest ranked dragonets basically fight in a deadly trial where only one will emerge victorious. So Winter's parents purposefully engineered the ranking specifically so that they could sacrifice the life of their son Winter, their unwanted failure, for the success and status of their true Icewing son Hailstorm. Whilst I'm sure your parents rooting for your death would be hurtful to anyone, it marks the breaking point for Winter where he finally begins to properly break away from his family. It still hurt, deep inside him where he thought his family couldn't hurt him anymore. Moon, Qibli, and Quincas wouldn't do something like this to me, he thought. So then Winter and Hailstorm enter the Diamond Trial. They are given animus-enchanted spears and are sent through a long tunnel of caves, eventually leading to a large cavern, in which they discover a frozen Nightwing alongside several frozen Icewings at the end. Their spears reanimate the Nightwing, who is revealed to be Foeslayer, Darkstalker's mother. They assume the first to kill/refreeze Foeslayer will be the winner, and the other immediately frozen like the other Icewings. Winter then lets Hailstorm kill Foeslayer and waits to die. Afterwards, it is revealed through Hailstorm that in order to win the trial, he was actually supposed to kill Winter with the enchanted spear to freeze him as well. Something he exclusively was told beforehand to guarantee his win, implying that the Diamond Trial had predetermined winners the whole time instead of a fair fight. But since neither want to kill each other, Winter says Hailstorm should go out and claim the win, and Winter will flee the Ice Kingdom and pretend to be dead. After Hailstorm leaves, Winter then frees Foeslayer from her animus-enchanted prison, and they both escape. It didn't sound possible. His whole life was about being an Icewing, being Queen Glacier's nephew, proving something to Tundra and Narwhal. He believed in the perfection and superiority of the Ice Kingdom. How could he ever be happy anywhere else? But now he'd been to so many other places. He'd seen the world beyond the Ice Kingdom, and it wasn't so terrible, really. Because happiness isn't where I am, it's who I'm with. This was his future now. Not Prince among Icewings, not Queen Glacier's nephew, not a warrior struggling his way up the rankings under the disapproving gaze of his parents. He was a dragon who had friends from other tribes, and he was going to save Jade Mountain with them. I think this was a really great way to finish his book. It was a meaningful and impactful way to demonstrate someone beginning to overcome their childhood abuse and prejudiced views through learning it's okay to trust in others around you. To learn that home and family is where you feel safe and heard and respected, and not who you're biologically related to. Seeing Winter slowly open up to and start to openly care for his friends was genuinely lovely to read. And to see him learn that what he needed wasn't to be admired by his family through getting the highest possible ranking, but the love and care of his friends, who accept him as he is. I think one of the saddest parts of Book 10 is that it started out fine. We even get to see several moments of growth for Winter in his interactions with Qibli. But he steadily gets worse and worse throughout the book to the point where it just feels insulting to the character. The character butchering starts on page 146, where when Qibli is trying to put an enchanted earring on Winter to protect him from Darkstalker's animus spells, he fights back in fear of ending up in a Hailstorm Pyrite situation and yells at Qibli, "You?" Winter snorted. "You don't have magic. You're completely ordinary. How could you save anyone?" This is a really cruel thing to say, to the point where it doesn't even feel like something Book 6 Winter would have said. There was no reason for Winter to have said this except as a lazy way for the author to reinforce Qibli's insecurity issues as part of his character arc. Further, we have the infamous scene where Winter yells at Moon and accidentally breaks a vase. This scene even has extra emphasis placed on it in the epilogue, as it implies that this was the tipping point as to why Moon chose Qibli over Winter. And of course, the scene is extraordinarily poorly written. First, Winter's extreme emotional outburst felt like it came out of nowhere, especially since it had been several books since Winter had acted like this. Secondly, whilst the extreme emotional reaction was obviously not okay, nor a healthy response, Winter telling Moon what Darkstalker had done, the attempted genocide of the entire Icewing tribe, was the right thing to do. She deserved to know what she believed her friend at the time was actually like, and reacting with anger, as long as it's not excessive, which it is in text, but I digress, to your friend being besties with a war criminal who's both actively trying to control delete your entire tribe and manipulate you with magic to change your emotions is pretty justified. I'd be really upset as well. But what I think the actual worst offense here was how winter was completely written out of the end of the story. For context, after Darkstalker tried to eradicate the Ice Wings with a magic plague, which killed 20 Ice Wings including their queen, once the plague was stopped, the Ice Wings then waged war on the Night Wings in retaliation, eventually leading to them having a battle above Jade Mountain, leading to a scene in which Hailstorm asks if Winter will still fight alongside them, to which Winter responds by saying, "You're my tribe, you're my family." Which was just about the worst way to make him join the fight, considering the sentiment behind that statement goes against the final message in his own book, that his friends are his home, and implicitly his new family after his biological family abandoned him and actively encouraged his death. This is even juxtaposed in this very same book, when on page 369 in the epilogue, he does actively call his friends his new family and new tribe. Additionally, Winter joining the fight honestly just felt like an excuse to write him out of the finale, as after the Animus empathy spell ended, the warring tribes were magicked back to their respective kingdoms, which included Winter, meaning Winter, one of the main characters who got their own point of view book, was completely absent from the confrontation with Darkstalker and the finale of the story, which is just abhorrent writing. Imagine if in the finale of the first arc, one of the Dragonettes of Destiny just wasn't there. It would feel completely out of place, unsatisfying, and confusing. This is then compounded by the fact that the only reason they were able to defeat Darkstalker in the first place was because Winter freed Foeslayer, Darkstalker's mother, at the end of his book after discovering she was frozen in time through Animus magic during the Diamond Trial. So a character who played an incredibly integral role in being able to stop Darkstalker in the first place was completely absent from his defeat and the ending of the book as a whole. In fact, as confirmed in the epilogue, Winter doesn't even know how his friends defeated Darkstalker in the first place. Nobody will tell me exactly what happened. That's because you might not be cool about it, Quincas pointed out. We know we can trust you to be a loyal friend and awesome dragon and stand with us when we need you, yes, said Quincas. But to let us handle Darkstalker our own way, we're not so sure. Yikes. I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't be cool about the existential horror that is Peacemaker's existence, but whatever, Quincas. Anyway, moving on from that shit fuckery, so whilst I can't confirm while the author absolutely dropped the ball on Winter's characterization last second, I do theorize it might have been as a result of the love triangle. Why does Winter become noticeably more unlikable as soon as they reunite with Moon? Well, to make Qibli look better in comparison. See, as someone active in the fandom in 2016 to 2017, Winter Watcher was solidly more popular than Moonblee was at the time, by a pretty noticeable margin. So I speculate Winter was purposefully made worse so fans would more readily accept Moonblee as the final resolution to the love triangle. Interestingly though, the present Wings of Fire fandom swings in the opposite direction, with Moonblee being solidly more popular than Winter Watcher. Though keep in mind that this is complete speculation on my end and there is no substantial proof to back it up. Although if true, makes Winter's character assassination even more aggravating than before. Imagine completely ruining an incredibly promising character just so a ship will look better. Alongside the fact that Winter is never written to properly apologize to all of his friends at the end of the arc in the prologue scene, also felt like a massive missed opportunity and general disservice to his character. It could have been a really great moment to both demonstrate how much Winter has changed and grown from how he was like in book 6, but also to have the character still take accountability for when he was being a dipshit in earlier books. This marks the end of my criticism of Arc 2. Also, I apologize for the audio issues that are present in the later sections. I did not realize they were there until I was already balls deep in editing. So again, sorry for that. But thank you if you've made it this far, and I hope you have a lovely day.